Good morning. Today is Friday, March 17th, 2023. Happy St. Patrick's Day. We're celebrating by doing two bills that we're going to be voting out today, and as well as looking at language from a third bill that's going to be coming out of Senate Judiciary today. Just for people who might want to know what's coming in what order, at 9 o'clock, we're picking up the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act that we've been talking about. At approximately 10:30, we'll be doing S80, the Agency of Natural Resources Miscellaneous Bill, and 10:45, S33, an act relating to miscellaneous judiciary procedures. That is actually coming out of judiciary, but it does affect exposure to contaminants, and Senator Sears thought we might want to be up to speed on what they're doing next door. So with that, good morning, Mr. Kowski. Thank you very much for coming back and bringing us a new draft of the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act.
Senator McDonald.
Introduce the bill with the date and time stamp, all that. Make sure that everyone knows exactly which version we're talking about. That would be great. And let's do a walkthrough.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. Today we're looking at draft request 23-476. It is draft 2.1 dated 3/16/2023 at 6:37 p.m. There are a handful of changes in this draft. They're not in yellow, but
Maybe we can walk through it.
we're going to walk through all of it because it's only 6 pages long. So on the first page, you will recall that this bill is extending the sunset on a pilot program that is existing currently in session law. It was enacted in 2020's Act 151. So Section 1 amends the session law provisions of that act. So first, on page 1, subsection A, the first change, and I will read through this, is extending the sunset on this pilot for 3 additional years. That wasn't what was in the prior draft, but I think you heard other testimony, but it is still 3 years in this draft. So on page 1, the electric resource acquisition budget for an entity appointed to provide electric energy efficiency and conservation programs and measures pursuant to 30 VSA 209 for the calendar years 2021 through 2026 shall be determined pursuant to 30 VSA 209. This section shall only apply if the entity's total electric resource acquisition budget for 2024 to 2026 does not exceed the entity's total electric resource acquisition budget for 2021 to 2023, adjusted for cumulative inflation between January 1, 2021 and July 1, 2023, using the National Consumer Price Index. An entity may include proposals for activities allowed under this pilot in its 2027 through 2029 demand resource planning, but these activities shall only be implemented if this section is extended to cover that time frame. So there's a couple of changes here. So as I mentioned before, this is extending the pilot 3 years until 2026, and it's referencing that it needs to be based on the budget for 2021 to 2023 adjusted for inflation. And then it's also allowing the efficiency utilities to include proposals for future years, but they can only go through with those and implement them if the pilot is extended.
I just wanted to pause. So thank you. The timing for this next extension, 2024 through 2026, corresponds to the next demand resource plan cycle. I think that sounds right. Maybe just Lucci confirm that for us. Great. All right. So we're syncing up the extension to the existing DRP set. Thank you.
On page 2, subsection B, Notwithstanding any provision of law or order of the PUC, to the contrary, the PUC shall authorize an entity pursuant to subsection A to spend its electric resource acquisition budget in an amount to be determined by the PUC, but not to exceed $2 million per year on programs, measures, and services that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in thermal energy or transportation sectors. So the language on line 8 is struck. It previously read, spend a portion of the budget not to exceed $2 million a year. I think it has the same meaning by striking those words. I don't think it does much, but.
Okay.
And then down on line 12, programs, measures, and services authorized pursuant to subsection A of this section shall reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the thermal energy or transportation sector or both, have a nexus with electricity usage, be additive and complementary to, and shall not replace or be in competition with electric utility energy transformation projects pursuant to 30 VSA 8005A3, which is tier 3, and existing thermal efficiency programs operated by an entity appointed under 209D. So thermal efficiency programs that are already authorized under 209, such that they result in the largest possible greenhouse gas emissions reductions in a cost-effective manner.
As determined by cost-effective manner, as determined by.
The Public Utility Commission.
There's some language coming out, evaluation, a little further down.
Evaluation already completed or promised sometime in the future.
Probably we could get there. I don't want to
Well, so
answer incorrectly.
well, so these programs have to be approved by the PUC before they're implemented.
Which means they don't have to be approved by us. Yeah.
Yes.
We've delegated that.
Yeah, and we have I'll wait till we get there, but we have a pilot that we presented to the legislature that before anything happens, there'll be an evaluation before we extend them or do anything. And it appears that we're extending them without the pilot having been evaluated. But
Right, so I would say there's more than one way to evaluate, right? You can have evaluation as the pilot's running, that's less formal than a complete review of the pilot, sort of like a post-mortem. So I don't know if you're saying we should complete the pilot and do sort of an after the fact evaluation before ever renewing. This seeks to keep it going. There have been evaluations along. There is an evaluation process along the way. There may well be a more formal one when you would complete the full pilot the first 3 years, but there is more language to come on evaluation.
The pilots have an expiration date.
Yeah.
And then
This one was set up for 3 years in 2020, actually right here in this committee. And then,
Yeah.
And the notion, let's back up, the history for it was that we hadn't passed a bill to address comprehensively thermal energy. We hadn't passed a bill comprehensively to address transportation energy. So, and we didn't have a funding stream to take on that work. Efficiency Vermont and others were interested in doing work in that area, and we changed the law to allow $2 million, for 4% of their budget, to flow over to activities that otherwise would be proscribed by the current statute. And then we've been running pilots in both transportation and thermal, and the concept was that we could get some real world experience, learn from it. And one day when we did have a bill that sought to address thermal indoor transportation more comprehensively and sustainably, we'd be all the wiser for having done the pilot work. We still don't have a comprehensive transportation or thermal bill. Even if S5 would have become law, it would be implemented in 2026. So this extends the pilot out through 2026. So that's the rationale from my perspective on why we're continuing to do the work. In terms of evaluating the work, the Efficiency Vermont and BED have both reported out twice on what they've been doing. And Ms. Lucci's here, Mr. Springer's on the screen. We can ask more questions for sure. I'm in no way saying we don't want to be evaluating what's going on. I guess the question is how formal an analysis of the data do you want at what point? Ms. Lucci.
I just wanted to note that this would be consistent with a lot of our regular evaluation processes. We don't typically stop programs in order for the department to evaluate how they're working. They evaluate it while the programs are in the market, and then we make changes based on what we learn and opportunities to improve. So this would be consistent with how our typical efficiency programs are evaluated.
Senator McDonald.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this bill, a couple of years ago, we established a pilot program which said that the law directing the energy efficiency fee collections from electric ratepayers was to be used exclusively to reduce, to make electric motors and things, air conditioners, et cetera, more efficient, to drive down the use of electricity and thereby save ratepayers money. We put, as they say today, guardrails around that and said, you can't use that money to, send your kids on a merry-go-round. You can't use that money for anything else except to reduce and make the use of electricity more efficient. And during those years, we've gone from the most expensive electricity in New England to tied with Maine for the least expensive. A few years ago, we established a pilot program to go in and grab some of that money to use for other purposes. And that was a pilot. Okay. And we were told that the pilot had a sunset because we were breaking our promise and our commitment, and we were there might be great benefits that come out of this, et cetera, while we look for a way to fund other efficiencies, and that we would evaluate it at a sunset time. So having passed a law that said you can only use it for this, and then made an exception for a pilot program that was going to be reviewed by a date certain, we are now we're getting rid of that date certain, and we appear to be opening it up to other uses which we expressly prohibited, and putting PUC in charge of whether or not they will continue and what the rates will be, et cetera, et cetera. What happened to our promise, which was broken with a sunset to see that it wasn't broken forever, that was going to be evaluated, which hasn't happened. And now we're opening up the gates even farther. We said we wouldn't do that. And then we said we'd do it only pending a review. And now we're saying they can go ahead and do it, and they can do other things that they haven't shared with us. And
Well, I think I'll respond threading it backwards. That they haven't shared with us, I'd say, is not accurate, given what Burlington Electric has brought before us and what Efficiency Vermont has brought before us. They give us a detailed report delivered twice over on the kinds of measures. And so I don't, so let me just stick with that. I don't think we're operating in the dark. We're, as Ms. Lucci just said, there is an ongoing evaluation process that happens while a program's operating. We can only get run, come to a full stop, evaluate it, and then have to start the whole thing up again. As for breaking a promise, I would object to that language. We write law, create policy, and we make changes. So we entirely explicitly said, notwithstanding that the original law, now 23 years on, we're saying we want to take 4% of that budget, which is, and use it.
Which budget?
The energy efficiency charge, electrical energy efficiency charge fund, and take 4% of that budget and allocate it to these, I'd say, complementary. Well, we have a list of 5 criteria about what kinds of things, but
Worthy stuff.
worthy stuff. And so, given the state of, had we launched a comprehensive thermal program, had we launched a comprehensive transportation program, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. We would already have self-sustaining funding and a much broader program to do this work. We have neither. And so from where I sit, I think it's wise of the state to keep funding at a modest level efforts to learn more about market transformation in transportation and thermal, so that one day, if we get a program up and running, we'll be all the wiser and more experienced for having done it. That's it.
What's the pressure on us to get a program up and running if we're funding this stuff with on the backs of electric ratepayers?
Because $2 million is enough to fund a very modest pilot, but we would need, we've had conversations as part of doing S5 about multi-billion-dollar investments over decades in order to run a truly comprehensive program. So I would say this is like funding a research and development project at a modest rate to prepare it to take on a much bigger project that I hope is not far off, like S5 and 2026.
The idea that we had made a commitment that we're backing out on. It's amazing to me that a term like sunset that's used so often, so many issues, that we actually don't seem to have a shared understanding of what sunset is. I know a lot of our colleagues, apparently you as well, Mark, would say that when something sunsets on a date certain, that means that on that date it ceases to exist. It's repealed, it's over. I've always understood sunset to mean we've committed up to this date and no further. And then at the sunset date, we have to now reopen the question. And that has happened where we've continued something that sunset, beyond the sunset. People said, but you promised. And I never promised it wasn't going to continue. I promised it would only continue up to this point, and then further decisions were necessary. And I think that's the case here. This is, if we choose to continue the pilot program, we're not going back on our word. We've made that decision anew.
Well, they work for some senators, and other senators say, when we have a sunset where we knowingly use money that we said we wouldn't use for a certain purpose, but that it's worthy to look into, and we will look into it by this date before we go farther down that road. So we'll have a sunset, and then here we are. That's
Looking into
farther
it.
down the road, and the sunset that we called for, we're going down the road again.
Here we are.
And
Like an electric car, it's driving itself. The PUC is now behind the wheel. And we have given up the wheel and haven't done the steering, and we haven't done we haven't had the report. And we are using electric ratepayers' money to replace transportation things. Now, I'm not get parochial, we've got Burlington, who has a wonderful program to deal with, spend up everybody's, all ratepayers' electric money, electricity revenues, efficiency fund stuff to do electric cars in a city where where their commuting time is paltry compared to the countryside that drives many, many, many more miles, and we do nothing to deal with those transportation fuels. So we're sending money to the people that don't need it, and we haven't reviewed the program to make some changes, and we're just letting it go on. All right, I'm picking up Burlington, but they're the
Everyone does all the time, not as one.
they do some wonderful things in Burlington.
So I would say,
I left cardboard out.
yeah, I appreciate that. The other utilities have participated in the discussions that led to the language in front of us today. So I don't think it's quite fair to lay this as just on BED as their idea. And Efficiency Vermont partners in this they're a statewide utility. So and Burlington
Well, then
Burlington's unique for sure.
Like I mentioned Burlington because I wasn't going to mention cardboard. But we use electric ratepayers' money to dry cardboard. And we buy fossil fuels with heating oil to dry cardboard with electric ratepayers' money. We said we wouldn't do that. And when we don't have a plan on how to deal with heat, thermal stuff, other than a bill which we had vetoed 2 years ago.
So I'm writing a note to myself to come back next week to learn more about the drying of cardboard. But I don't think that for now.
Well, we'll come back next week and find out how many horses we let out of the barn. After today, gonna let some more horses out of the barn.
Well, sunsets are a useful construct for advancing work when you want to do it.
Oh,
Senator
yeah.
McCormick said,
Oh, it's
We wanna-
useful.
do something and evaluate it. We just used a whole series of them in the S-100 amendment that this committee voted on. So with that, I'd like to return to the walkthrough so we know what the bill in front of us actually as modified sets up.
Sure, so on page 3, starting on line 3. The program shall be proposed after the entity consults with any relevant state agency or department and shall not be duplicative or in competition with programs delivered by that agency or department. Number 5, the program shall be delivered on a statewide basis. However, this shall not preclude the delivery of services specific to a retail electricity provider. Should such services be offered, all distribution utilities and Vermont Public Power Supply Authority shall be provided the opportunity to participate, and those services shall be designed and coordinated in partnership with each of them. For programs and services that are not offered on a statewide basis, the proportion of utility-specific program funds used for services to any distribution utility shall be no less than the proportionate share of the energy efficiency charge, which in the case of VIPSA is the amount collected across their combined member utility territories during this period, the period this section remains in effect.
Any questions on page 3? So Senator McDonald, I know that this is probably going to be full comfort, but I'm just going to point out to lines 11 to 14 about the services being offered to all utilities. So I know that you're not picking on BED.
Which page?
That'd be page 3, lines 11 through 14, where there's language to ensure that the distribution of services under the program goes to every utility. Okay, page 4.
So on page 4, the only changes down at the bottom of the page. Do you want me to read through all of the language?
Read through because this is our one coherent read through after multiple changes.
Sure, so page 4, line 1. An entity that is approved to provide a program, measure, or service pursuant to this section shall provide the program, measure, or service in cooperation with a retail electricity provider. The entity shall not claim any savings and reductions in fossil fuel consumption and in greenhouse gas emissions by the customers of the retail electricity provider resulting from the program, measure, or service if the provider elects to offer the program, measure, or service under Tier 3, unless the entity and provider agree upon how savings and reductions should be accounted for, apportioned, and claimed. The PUC shall develop standards and methods to appropriately measure the effectiveness of the program, measures, and services in relation to the entity's demand, resources, plan, proceeding.
So, and I'm gonna, sorry, council, I wanted to pause. So on page 4, lines 10 through 12, again, I don't know if this is satisfies your interest or not, but we do have explicit language identifying the evaluation process by the PUC. Okay. Thank you.
Line 13. Any funds spent on programs, measures, and services pursuant to this section shall not be counted towards the calculation of funds used by retail electricity provider for energy transformation projects under Tier 3 and the calculation of project costs under Tier 3. On or before April 30th, 2021, and every April 30th for 6 years thereafter, the PUC shall submit a written report to the House Committee on Environment and Energy and the Senate Committees on Natural Resources and Energy and on Finance concerning any programs, measures, and services approved pursuant to this section.
So we should be seeing a report on April 30th. Or we have, maybe a useful thing for us to do, if you could help us get last April 30th report.
I got it a few minutes ago, actually.
Thank you.
It is posted on the website.
Thank you.
I can send it to Jude if that would be helpful. Yeah, but they have been submitting the reports annually, at least for the last 2 years.
Okay.
So on page 5, this is the biggest change in this bill, and largely it is not. So there's a new subsection being added on page 5. However, it is almost entirely the language that was in section 3 of the prior draft. So there was a proposal to amend section 209E of Title 30, which relates to the thermal efficiency and process efficiency funds, and how those funds could be spent in relation to this pilot program. And so in order for that extension and change in how the funds would be spent, in order to make that line up with the sunset of this pilot, I've added it here in the session law so that it will sunset with the rest of the bill. So on page 5, line 3, thermal energy and process fuel efficiency funding, notwithstanding 30 VSA 209E, each of the following shall be used to deliver thermal energy and process fuel or energy or transportation energy efficiency services in accordance with 209E for unregulated fuels to Vermont consumers of such fuel. So that's very similar to what language is in the existing statute, but this is going to override this for the life of this pilot. In addition, the commission may authorize an entity appointed to deliver such services under 209 to use money subject to this subsection for engineering, design, and construction of facilities for the conversion of thermal energy customers using fossil fuels to district heat if the majority of the district heat is from biomass sources, the district's distribution system is highly energy efficient, and the conversion is cost effective. So that language already exists in Title 30 209E. In addition, down on line 13, a retail electricity provider that is also an entity appointed under 209D2A, which is an efficiency utility, may use during the years 2024 through 2026, may use monies subject to this subsection to deliver thermal and transportation measures or programs that reduce fossil fuel use regardless of the pre-existing fuel source of the customer, including measures or programs permissible under this pilot program, with special emphasis on measures or programs that take a new or innovative approach to reducing fossil fuel use, including modifying or supplementing existing vehicle incentive programs and electric vehicle supply equipment grant programs to incentivize high consumption fuel users, especially individuals using more than 1,000 gallons of gasoline or diesel annually, and those with low and moderate income to transition to the use of battery electric vehicles. So that last part about transportation fuel, transportation programs, that is what is new here. So as I mentioned, instead of amending the statute directly, this is a session law provision so that it could be used as part of the pilot program, and then it will be repealed when the rest of the pilot is repealed.
Very much. Any committee questions for council?
Finally, on page 6, section 2 updates the repeal date, so the sunset. So this act is in effect on passage and shall be repealed on April 30th, 2027. So again, extending it 3 years.
Any other comments or questions for council? Let's, if you could stay with us at the table, I want to check in with the language we have, the revised language that we have here today comes out of conversations that were had with folks we heard testimony from yesterday, that I asked on behalf of the committee that they have discussions and come back with a proposal. And I just want to check in with that group of folks to see if everyone's in agreement with all the changes as is, or if there's still any items that people are not in agreement on. So why don't I just go around the room, and we can do this somewhat informally and just check in. So Ms. Bailey, on behalf of the department, do you have anything you want to share about this draft?
Sure, yeah, thanks. We did collaborate with the other stakeholders on the language, and I think the department's outstanding concern is regarding PUC discretion to approve the programs. The discussion we had yesterday around whether PUC shall approve these programs or whether they may. And I think our concern there somewhat gets to the concern Senator McDonald was expressing, that we have heard a lot about what ACWA UN programs are doing, but in my mind, that's not the same as an evaluation. So they have not been evaluated, and a big component of the evaluation is what else would that money have been spent on? And we are not having those conversations in committee. And so there's really not an ability to look at trade-offs. And so the department's position is that that should happen at the PUC with data and be data-driven, and that the EEU proposal should stand up to that regulatory scrutiny and be passed by and approved ultimately by the PUC. That's really our only concern with the language in the current draft. And then just one point of clarification for the committee, and maybe this is helpful in alleviating some of Senator McDonald's concerns. We do have concerns about using PEPF money for transportation generally. That has not been department's preferred approach. Yeah. We are okay with the language as currently written, specific for an electric department. And part of my comfort with that stems from the fact that these are all authorized activities under Tier 3. So the activities that Burlington will be pursuing, they could have pursued under Tier 3, which mandates utilities to do fossil fuel reduction. So really, in my mind, it's having the EU do some activities that the distribution utility could have done. So it's more of an accounting understand,
Okay.
and an issue of authorization.
So on that, there's obvious sensitivity about the evaluation. How much do we know about the program thus far? And so we had paused to talk about lines 10 through 12 on page 4 of the bill. And this is existing language from 2020. I think the PUC shall develop standards and methods to appropriately measure the effectiveness of their programs, measures, and services in relation to the entity's demand resources plan proceeding. So has that not been happening?
So the metrics that have been developed and approved by PUC are things like, how many dealers did you incentivize to go through training or install EV charging infrastructure, right? They're largely how many metrics, right? They're how many customers did you serve? How many, I don't know, the website hits, things like that. And so to me, that's not the same as an evaluation in comparison to other activities. And the department will be responsible for doing the evaluation at the end of the 3-year plan. But I will add that the evaluation will be complicated for these activities because the way the bill language is written, the entities are supposed to be getting the largest greenhouse gas reduction possible, that's the language, and they're not able to claim their greenhouse gas reduction. So those two are in a bit of tension when you try and look at how do you evaluate these programs, how do you evaluate how much GHG reduction did you get from these when the entities are specifically precluded from claiming GHG reduction. I think that's been a tension in the bill since 2020, and it will complicate the evaluation.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, so there's layer and layer of nuance on how things are being evaluated. The language on 10 through 12, appropriate measure the effectiveness of the program, et cetera, was, I'd say, our best effort in 2020, at least, to say we want to be aware of the effectiveness of the program so that we're not operating, we're not guessing that it's a good idea. We're getting formal evaluation from the PUC to ensure that they're basically an effective program. So I don't know if that language ought to be revised in a way to become more explicit or not, but for the time being, just note that there's language that addresses the notion of effectiveness and what we mean by that. I think we're learning there's more than one way to describe it. Okay, so Ms. Lucci, you were one of the parties to the new language. Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Do you have anything you want to share about the draft we're looking at? Senator McDonald?
The witness talked about the evaluation process, which will someone be looking at whether or not using electric energy charges to reduce fossil fuel use works or not? Well, certainly it works. I mean, if you use sports betting money to reduce fossil fuel use and spent it on the same things, it would work. So the test isn't just that it works. The test is you can reduce fossil fuel use by not using fossil fuels.
Sure. So, but you started to say something interesting.
Well,
The test is what?
True about it.
The test is
Yeah, what's a good,
a fair metric. I mean, I'm not sure what it would be. You have language here talking about effectiveness and evaluation. We know there's a DRP process that looks at effectiveness evaluation on a regular basis. So
Well, we used to use electric, I'm old ground here, electric efficiency money to reduce the amount of electricity needed to perform a whole host of tasks.
absolutely.
And in the
change
process,
that
reducing citizens and businesses' electric bills. And now we're gonna take the money that we used to do that with to do fossil fuel work.
Sure. And I'd say we
Yes.
started doing that. We authorized this pilot to start 3 years ago.
Yep.
And that's what we're talking about. So it's, you know, the idea that we're now doing something different, I'd say the point of this bill is to adjust the program some, but to continue the pilot for another 3 years. I've already spoken as to why 2026. As soon as we'll have a thermal program, and I don't see a transportation program on the horizon yet. So that's.
We're the ones who designed the horizon.
Okay, well, S5, I think we leaned into that one, did a pretty good job so far.
Got slapped around a little bit.
There is, Senator White has a
Yeah.
transportation fuels bill. We have another chance to lean in.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Bray. Senator McDonald, I totally appreciate where you're coming from. I think I'm personally really happy with the language as it stands, other than maybe a minor change to some of the super user conversation we had. But I'm really supportive of this language because it's adding on to great work that's already been done. And what I heard pretty loud and clear from DED was there's almost a loop. There's a problem that they're experiencing because they don't have unregulated fuels in the same way as VGS customers, they have a regulated fuel. So we're actually doing something really innovative and supporting VED where they have been unable to do that work without our change of the law. So I'm really supportive of this language, and I hear what you're saying, but I think values-wise, we're actually very aligned with the work we're trying to do, but it is.
Absolutely support the work you're trying to do. Rating funds isn't innovative. It's what happens all the time.
I don't know if I would call it rating funds, but we can agree to disagree on that.
Nice.
This is,
And
yeah.
Ms. Cohen, you were here sort of as a guardian angel, or do you want to speak on behalf?
want to go first.
Oh, sorry.
Well, we-
No, sorry. I know that.
Sorry.
I only remember that I called on Ms. Lucci before we took a
I'm ready
team
after
tour.
her.
Okay.
So we support the current language. You know, I understand there may be some tweaks to the final section, which, as we noted, was DCF, and we continue to do that to apply to efficiency Vermont. The only thing I wanted to say is I want us to recall that there's an awful lot of rigor built into our DRP process and our existing processes that forces on the efficiency utilities the need to consider those trade-offs. We lose out if we propose programs that are going to inhibit our ability to continue driving cost-effective electric savings. So I just wanted to note that it's not as though this program exists in a vacuum. There is an awful lot of rigor, metrics, and requirements that we have to meet in order to then also offer these programs. And we do think through that tension when we're considering how we're going to propose programs.
Okay, you have, I don't know what's the right term, the quality performance measures or that you have to get evaluated on.
Right, we have to meet those.
QPIs.
QPI, so quality performance,
Quantifiable performance.
quantifiable, thank you.
We talked a lot about them when I was there. They're
Okay,
Is
very,
that the one you mentioned yesterday?
that might be, yes, it's very important.
QPs, okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the record.
Ms. Cohen.
Andrew at Congamon Electric Cooperative. I think the guardrails and the sunsets are absolutely essential for us. And we are able to support this bill because those are in there. So if those changed, the limitations on time and money is essential because we do not think in the long run, electric rate payers should be paying for thermal efficiency and transportation programs. So we're watching this very closely because it really is important. That's that we do support this draft and the extension outlined COVID for some of the problem. I don't feel like we really had a good run at this, like in the normal world. So we're okay with a little more time to kind of look and evaluate and bridge to whatever's next. The world is changing rapidly. What we thought 3 years ago was a good use of what you would be spending these dollars on, I would say very different right now. So it's nimble and it's changing fast, and we're just going to keep in very close touch with our utility partner to make sure that the money's spent well and relevant to our service territory. It's very rural and different things than what maybe Burlington's doing. That last section, I think, Ben has some language, and we support that change. We think there's just a little drafting tweak that needs to happen to make it make sense, so.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Springer, just want to check in with you briefly if you are there. There you are. So you've heard the conversation so far. Just want to check in and see if so far you're supportive of the language as proposed today.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the committee. Darren Springer, General Manager, Burlington Electric. We are supportive of the language. We believe it's a good compromise on a variety of issues. Obviously, the extension is a little shorter than what we discussed yesterday, but we retain the ability to propose programs in the next DRP, which was important to us. So we appreciate working with the department on that concept. We appreciate the flexibility in the TEPF funds to be able to utilize those on behalf of our customers. It's our customers' share of those monies, and we're trying to utilize them in a way that benefits our customers broadly. And I would just mention relative to the broader conversation this morning, and I think Melissa Bailey kind of referenced this as well. All of our Act 151 programs have a nexus to our electricity system. They're being utilized to support heat pumps, electric vehicle charging stations, pilot programs related to electricity use. And I think Senator McDonald's absolutely correct that there has been a longstanding tradition of utilizing the efficiency charge to benefit electric system users by reducing electric use. And I think the paradigm is shifting, as we all know, towards utilizing the now very much renewable electricity system. 25 years ago, it was less renewable than it is now. So saving a kilowatt hour was also a fossil fuel reduction measure. It's less the case now. And in Burlington, it's not the case at all because we're 100% renewable. But using that system to electrify in the heating and transportation sectors. So I've been very proud to share with the committee many times a graph that shows declining electric use in Burlington because of the work we've done on efficiency. And we're going to continue to do that work. But at the same time, if I was to come in 10 years from now and share with the committee the same graph, it means we failed in our effort to electrify the heating and transportation sectors. We need to use more electricity to reduce fossil fuel use and less energy overall. And that's our mission. This program very much supports that mission. And if we were to sunset it, the effect on Burlington customers would be that they would have less, in terms of EV incentives, heat pump incentives, geothermal programs in the next calendar year. And obviously, we know we have to do more, not less. So we're very appreciative of the committee for considering this, and I'm glad to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay. I do have a quick question. So the current language on page 2, line 7, about notwithstanding any provision or provision of law or order of the Public Utility Commission to the contrary, the PUC shall authorize. And that's existing law. There was some discussion about changing that. Can you say a little bit about why it's important from your perspective as a participant in these programs to have a shall there?
Absolutely. And as you note, that's current language that we were opting to try to retain. I think the idea here is there will be a program. It's not a discretionary decision whether or not there is a program. I think in this case, the legislature would be saying there is going to be a program. However, the amount of spending on different programs within Act 151, the relative benefit from a greenhouse gas emission reduction standpoint and cost effectiveness standpoint of putting money into multifamily charging versus geothermal test wells versus heat pumps. Those are all pieces that I think the PUC and the department have discretion to review, to analyze, to affect during the DRP process. So I think all that the may versus shall conversation is saying is there will be a program, not there may be a program. And then beyond that, the particulars of the program, I do believe the PUC and the DPS have authority within this to help shape that in a way they feel is cost effective for ratepayers.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Springer? Going around the room, thank you. Mr. Zwicky, you've been in the room. I don't know if you want to contribute to today's conversation, if you have an interest in the draft. And we'll come back to Mr. Coda.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dylan Zwicky with Lean on Public Affairs here on behalf of BGS and GFP. We just got out of the Zoom remarks. We've had Adrian going for BEC, but both BGS and GFP are comfortable with the draft as presented today. And I also understand that Ben is going to have some changes, which we are also comfortable with.
Okay. And Mr. Walsh, so you're here, and as I understand it, you have some language changes to propose. So other than the change you're about to propose, are you, and you were part of the conversation, part of the group that came forward with the language, are you supportive of the draft with a potential further amendment to come?
Yes, for the record, Ben Julie Walsh with the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. And yes, BPERG supports this bill, this draft, and just as a preview, the tweak that we have is to section F, and it's to address the concern that others have raised about that TEPF flexibility also applying to efficiency Vermont, and it would really just attempt to limit it to the.
Okay. So since you're part of the group crafting language, sorry, do you know what your timing is to return?
You just text me and I'll come back.
Okay, thank you. Busy day. All right, here we go. So you're part of the group. You had a further adjustment to the language you wanted to propose. So if you could, well, I'll stay where we are. No musical chairs. If you could present that to the committee in the room, that would be helpful.
So as I said, this is to, I think I only have 5 copies, so I emailed it to,
Thank you.
essentially as I read, and I have had an opportunity to check in with some of the other members of the small working group that has been discussed. I think we're all in agreement on this, obviously. Feel free to say that's not the case. As I read the language in 2.1, the flexibility to apply the thermal energy and process fuel dollars to transportation expenditures, transportation programs, applies to all electric EUs, which is to say efficiency Vermont as well as Burlington Electric Department, because transportation appears up here near the top. So this suggested additional amendment would essentially start with the notwithstanding 30 VSA 2.9E, which is the TEPF part of statute, and then just go straight down to the part that only applies to Burlington Electric Department and provide all the flexibility that Ledge Council described. And I don't think, from the working group standpoint, the loss of the struck-through language here would change the effect that we were in agreement on, at least. Obviously, it's a policy decision, but while I brought forward language yesterday that would have applied to efficiency Vermont as well, as I stated on the record yesterday, and as others have stated, the real intent is for BED to have this flexibility. And so we would prefer it be limited to BED. So that is what this is attempting to do, and obviously want to make sure that it is what it in fact does.
So thank you for that. Yeah, I think it was just in terms of high level language, the intent, as we discussed it yesterday, I believe, anyone in the committee, correct me if I'm misrepresenting our position, was that it was that this last thermal energy and process fuels provision was going to apply uniquely to Burlington Electric. So because of their role as both, well, I'll just stop there. It was Burlington Electric. And so council, as you look at, it sounds as though the language is drafted would allow for Efficiency Vermont also to participate in that. So can you give us some, your thinking on whether or not this language is needed, or whether or not the language that's currently in the bill would allow Efficiency Vermont to participate in the same thermal energy process fuel program, and so it should be narrowed? That's the question. I mean, you weren't here for the discussion, so.
Right, so I did miss, I think, the point that it was supposed to be specific to Burlington.
Yeah.
I did know that.
Yeah,
So,
so that, I'll own that one. We talked about it last night, or late yesterday, and I may well not have been clear enough that it was just that, and that these provisions were also session law only for the 3-year pilot period.
so I do think the language I added to the draft is probably inclusive of Efficiency Vermont. I just am reading this language now, so I can't really evaluate it, honestly, in the 90 seconds.
Okay.
So so that's all I got. I mean, I would maybe need another 5 minutes. I don't know.
Okay, well, we will, yeah, so let's just jump briefly, because we've heard from everyone other than Mr. Coda has joined us today. So I'm here for Mr. Coda, and then we'll take that brief recess so you can not be rushed in your review of the language, sort of a calm, quiet space to do a lawyerly review. So Mr. Coda, good morning. Haven't seen you for a little while. Something has piqued your interest.
I'm back with Meadow Hill on behalf of the Vermont Vehicle and Automobile Distributors Association. I can't stress enough for legislative council to review the language, but I'll speak briefly and say we are interested in how the program monies are spent when it comes to incentivizing electric vehicles. That's not the forum here to discuss how the program monies are spent.
Right, thank you. All right, so I don't want council to have to do this with us sitting right at the table. So why don't we take just is a 5-minute break sufficient for you to break? We're kind of go by 10:30.
Yeah,
And so
Take a full report, minutes.